It's really important, first of all, to understand that water is becoming increasingly important around the world as more and more communities search for ways to get access to reliable water supplies and use it for agriculture, for mining, for industry, everything that happens. Demand for water is rapidly rising, supplies are often going down, and when the tensions come together, there's a need for change. My research has focused on really the big question of how do you provide access to water most equitably, most fairly, and at the same time affording to do it. Many of the arrangements you have in place around the world place big drains on government policies, and they do so very ineffectively. The question is, how do we improve that? How do we make water more affordable and now enable it to make a faster and greater contribution? When you start unpacking everything that's occurring around the world and look carefully, you see first and foremost that the world's been under-investing in water storage in lots of parts of the world, and that's holding back economic growth, particularly in poorer countries. They don't have the storage, they don't have the infrastructure that's needed. Then when we look on, we discover that a very significant proportion of people in this world still don't have access to affordable water supplies. The utilities that supply water to cities often don't cover all of the city. There's not enough money to build this infrastructure. Those disadvantaged people pay 50 to 60, even 70 times the cost of having access to water from a sustainable, well-run supply system. The question is, how do you afford this? And the thing that comes when you look at this through a fiscal lens is you realise it would be better for those people to pay the full cost, because it would be a lot cheaper for them. And then when you look on and see, but what about all the other people who currently get water? They all get it largely under highly subsidised supply arrangements which cost governments. And when you're looking behind that, everybody says, look, you need to give poor people cheap access to water. But when you look at what's really going on, we find that most of the subsidy doesn't go to those poor people who have access. In fact, it goes to much richer households, often very, very wealthy people. That's unfair and it's inequitable, and it denies everybody opportunities for growth. So the simple policy recommendation that comes out of looking at this carefully is it would be better for everybody to do what Chile now does and supply everybody access to water at the full cost of running a really efficient, well-run system, and doing the same for sanitation services, and then giving rebates or assistance to poor, needy people, using a separate mechanism to charge them, rather than having very expensive, poorly run systems that give most of the benefits from the subsidies and the pricing arrangements to rich people. That doesn't make sense. Moving on, what's the other next big policy implication that comes out of this? Is when you look at the increasing number of people in the world who are starting to struggle to get access to water for commercial use, for industry, for mining, for growing the food we urgently need, you find that governments are not setting sustainable limits. And this means that they don't have a mechanism to manage shortages that works well. They regulate and control in ways that stop innovation, stop adaptation. The obvious solution there is to set limits, to get really good governance arrangements in place. And once you've done that, then start using market mechanisms to promote and speed change. And the last part of the research that I've been doing looks at the role of subsidies for fertilisers, subsidies for agricultural production, subsidies for many things that happen in society, and looking at how those factors affect water. The very simple conclusion that comes out of that is many of them are causing a lot of the problems we now find in water management by subsidising activities that don't make sense. The obvious thing to do there is to recognise that the way water is managed around the world is going to have to change very quickly, and the way you do that is to search for policies to expedite change and facilitate adjustment and phase out all those lock-in existing arrangements that are not working well and not serving the world. I think the biggest need is to get much better understanding of where these subsidies are changing the way water is used and where the impacts are. One of the biggest ones, which is quite surprising, that so little work's been done on it, is to look at the relationship between water use and household income. Many people assume that rich households consume a lot of water. That small amount of research has been done looking at the relationship between water use and household income shows that sometimes that's the case, but many times it's not the case. And that people have failed to look at how many people live in each household. Poorer households classically have more people living in them than larger households. That means they consume more water. All this needs to be untangled, and everybody needs to map out who's really benefiting from things like inclining block tariffs and all the charging regimes that are used, so that we can use the scarce resources available for improving this world and including everybody in its development for greatest advantage.